Hello and welcome to another session of the Matura Express. Today I'm gonna talk about describing graphs, tables and statistics. Be tuned. So hello to another stream of the Matura Express. You haven't seen my face, I guess. My name is Christoph and I'm the new member of the Matura Express. And today we're gonna talk about a very important topic actually, which is called describing graphs, tables and statistics. So first we're gonna look at the overview because at the outline of today's stream. At first we're gonna talk about the types of graphs, charts, tables and statistics. Then we're gonna move forward to useful phrases for describing graphs, charts, tables and statistics. Then how to describe graphs and charts, describing tables, describing statistics, and last but not least, a short practice and demonstration of describing graphs, tables and statistics. So we're gonna start with the types of graphs. At first I have to mention that those graphs you can see here, so this pie chart and this table chart, they are taken from the book you all have, which is called Englisch für die Berufsreifeprüfung Hauptmodul, Topics. The pages are 378 and until the page 381. Those pages are very good to practice, actually, and you should look them up because they're quite useful and described very good and illustrated. Yes, so we're gonna move on. So the first graph we see here, this one, is a pie chart. We all know that. It's also in German, it's called Kuchendiagramm sometimes. And we're gonna look into the pie chart later on, since I've provided a demonstration. I'm gonna talk about actually this pie chart. Then we have on the other side here, that's a bar chart because of the bars here. Yeah, it's like another chart in the chart family. And we're gonna move on to a very famous one. That's a line graph, which shows one graph that's depicted on a horizontal axis, on a vertical and a horizontal axis. And right besides the line graph, there is a table. Which shows in this case homicides with firearms, the percentage of homicides with firearms. Okay, there's also another one that I haven't included. It's also on the page 378 from the book I've already mentioned. That's the flow chart, but I'm not looking into the flow chart today. If you want to have a look at it, you can do so in the Berufsreifeprüfung book, but since it's not that common, I'm gonna look into only those 4 types of graphs, charts or tables. And of course statistics, I'm gonna mention that later too, are of course always some kind of table or chart or line graph, but we're gonna discuss that later. So let's move on. useful vocabulary and phrases. So as you've already come across, I think you have come across a few of those terms. What do we have here? So it's always increase, decrease, so it's always positive, negative, or opposite, the opposite of one word. So the first word, increase, and the opposite is of course decrease. So if something increases, like with a line graph, I'll show it better like this, it increases, and in this way it decreases, something decreases. Climb and fall, we all know that. Climb is increase, fall is decrease. A bit stronger. Then we have rise and drop, although drop is a bit stronger than decrease. We're also gonna discuss other phrases later. So drop is really a bit stronger as decrease. Leave it there. Then we have a really cool word, to plummet, which is to fall off very quickly and suddenly. I think that's one of the terms you should use in your oral exams if you have to describe chart, table, or statistics. It's gonna make a good impression on the examinee. Then we have other vocabulary, of course, stagnate, which is the same as in German, stagnieren, which is something stays the same, and fluctuate, which is something goes a bit up and a bit down, but no clear peak or fall. So then we're gonna look at the phrases. The phrases, I think there are a lot of phrases. You also can find a lot of phrases on the internet, of course. So please take the internet as a source. There are several websites, but there's also the book, which I shortly mention again for those of you who haven't heard it. So it's English for the Berufsreifeprüfung Hauptmodul. This book is, I think, awesome on this chapter. What do we have here? Phrases such as, the graph shows that, blah, blah, blah. The graph shows that in April, sales declined by 7%. Or in a case of having a pie chart, this pie chart illustrates that fish oil production has gone or decreased by 7%. Then important to remember this, the pie chart, the several pieces of a pie chart are called slices. So such with a cake, you have also slices. In a pie chart, you also name them slices. It sounds more formal, more proficient if you use such terms. With a pie chart, important. If you have those several slices, you can always, or you should always compare them. Since you don't have that much material to talk about and you want to not mention every slice with its percentage, you can come up with a comparison, simple comparison, and we're gonna talk about that later actually. So we talked about that already, temperatures, sales, other things, diseases or obesity increased in February or last year or last month. Then we have adverbs. Adverbs also important to use, sounds more sophisticated and more proficient for you as an English student. I think as an examinee, if a student were to use such words, I would be more impressed than if a student wouldn't do so. So something has increased, decreased slightly, significantly, dramatically. Of course, something could also increase or decrease slowly, gradually, steadily. Then if something is stagnant, if something stagnates, it can remain relative. Also, you could call it it remained relatively stable or extremely stable. The next term is actually also quite important, I'd say. Something has leveled off at 9%. So if, for example, something peaked before, the sales peaked and then decreased, and they start to stagnate, they leveled off at something. So in this case at 9% or at 1,000 units or whatever the pie chart or graph shows. Of course, you could also, if you're explaining a graph, point at like a specific part of the graph or slice of the pie chart by mentioning that, let me draw your attention to this part of the graph or to this slice of the pie chart, and then you really have your attention and then you can talk about it, what you actually prepared, and impress the examinees. We already talked about the last two. It's more about comparing something. It's like, is as big as something is bigger than something. Yes, so always remember such phrases. Phrases is always important. Especially you have an oral exam, and if you learn them by heart, it will make you more fluent and you will remember them better, of course, if you've revised them over and over again. So it's those phrases and vocabulary, of course, you all know that is very important for especially with a oral exam where you're a bit nervous and So keep that in mind. Now we're gonna go to the chapter describing graphs and charts. As I've mentioned, this graph is from page 37.9 of the book Berufsreifeprüfung. And I actually took it out because it's so brilliantly explained in there. So with the first here, I'm gonna use this little laser thingy here. So here you can see it increases. There's an arrow and it goes upward, of course. And what vocabulary you can use here is to boost, to climb, to rise, to go up, to grow, which is a nice word, I think. To increase, to improve. And of course, the more extreme version of the first version is to rocket or to rocket up, to soar, really strong word. So to shoot up or to skyrocket. And of course such vocabulary is quite impressive when it's used in an oral exam situation. And if something has reached its maximum, you could say, to reach a maximum, of course, to peak, or to reach an extreme. So to peak, just remember, when you're on the mountain, the peak is der Gipfel. So the very top of the mountain is the peak, and I think it's easy to remember if you're like with such vocabulary, if you're imagining like a mountain going up, there is the peak, and it decreases on the other side when you go down. Of course, there is some more vocabulary. So the opposite of the first one with increasing is, of course, to decline, to decrease, to fall, to drop, to deteriorate, which is actually a word in German is sich verschlechtern. So it's maybe a vocabulary that you haven't heard that much, but I think it's good writing this word in your vocabulary book. And of course, the more extreme version here: to collapse, to crash, to plunge, to slump, to plummet, which I've already mentioned, which are all stronger words you can use for describing a graph, a line that goes down very, very, very extremely, decreases very extremely. And of course, to reach a low, to hit a low, and to bottom out, which is described here brilliantly. I think it's very obvious what it's meant to be: to reach a low here, and then it goes back upward again. Okay. But those are basically things you should learn, study, learn them by heart, yes, basically. And important now, we have some other phrases which we talked about, is when something is fluctuating. So something can remain stable. If you want to use synonyms, that of course you don't want to use the same word all over again. So use those to remain stable, steady, unchanged, to stay constant, to stabilize, to stagnate. Of course, we have talked about this. Or if something beforehand increased and then decreased, and then started to stagnate, we call it the line evens out, flattens out, to level off. We already had that. To level out, to stop rising or stop falling. As I've mentioned, those terms are basically just here to explain to you which phrases and vocabulary and basically how to describe those graphs. You should use those words, how to describe graphs and charts, and you will need them for other things, of course, such as if your sales have decreased, you will always use such phrases, or remain stable. It's something that's, yeah, commonly used. So let's move on to describing statistics. As I've mentioned at the beginning, it's quite obvious that they are very similar to the description of graphs, charts, but not only actually graphs and charts, but also, of course, statistics could also be a table that is depicting a percentage or anything else, or a pie chart or something different. Therefore, I've provided you a link here. We're gonna post it in the description below. But this is just to showcase you what statistics look like or can look like. So that's actually statistics. Yeah, you can really see from the Pew Research site, which is basically a statistics website, and that statistics is about for the gun owning households in the US. And of course, here you can see in this case the statistics is depicted by a pie chart, and a bar graph. And sometimes you encounter, of course, a line graph, or a line graph with more than one graph in it, of course. In this case, 57% live in a household with no guns, and only a smaller amount of them currently own a gun, which is 30%, of course. And you can, yeah, if you have something like this and you prepared with how to describe pie charts, line graphs, and so on, you can easily read statistics, interpret them, and do your oral exams how you should do. Okay, so we had that. Describing statistics, I think, is really, it's more important to look at pie graphs and line graphs and all of that, and be sure to know how to describe them, use the phrases, and especially important is that you at home practice. Just go on the Pew Research site, or just type in graph or chart, and a chart or graph or something will pop up on the internet, and you're just good to go to describe such graphs. I think in the book there's also on page 381 there's also a line graph in this case to help you to practice. But of course you can also draw your own graph or pie chart, and then let a fellow of you or friend of you describe it, and vice versa. So that's a great method to practice, actually. Okay. So I think we have a lot of vocabulary covered, but I think sometimes with tables you might think, why should I describe a table? It looks like so yeah, just primitive. But of course you can, if you have a table, you have to deal with it and you have to interpret it, and you can best, of course, look at the different columns, compare the columns. Of course, the more simpler thing you should basically avoid to mention every column and not every column, every row. That's not good. Don't do that. So try to compare, and maybe if you're, for example, you're quite surprised that homicides in Singapore, homicides with firearms, the percentage of homicides with firearms in Singapore is that low. If you're, for example, really surprised by it, then you can start, it's really interesting that the percentage of homicides with firearms in Singapore is that low, or compared to Colombia. I've provided a sentence like this here so you can see it better. It is quite surprising to me that 37% of all homicides in Switzerland are committed with firearms, which was surprising for me actually, because I didn't know that Swiss people use that a lot of firearms. Of course, we all know about the US and Colombia, The second highest number of homicides with firearms can be found in the US, or something like this. Try to make it more lively, not reading the table. If you start reading the table, it will be boring for your examinees. So don't do that. Don't read the table. Practice the phrases and try to incorporate your own kind of not your own, some kind of your own opinion about it. So just as I did with with the last sentence. So that's actually the last chapter in our presentation, or in our stream today. Now what we're going to do is to practice. So I'm gonna do a pie chart and a line graph. And of course, I've come up with a strategy you can use if you want to. I thought about it, how you can best approach describing a graph or a pie chart or statistics. And if you're starting to describe those graphs at first, if you look at the graph, you should at first think about what does the graph, what does the table, what does the statistics show. So what's the headline on it? You shouldn't really start explaining immediately, there is 2% rise in August and then it leveled off at 9%. No, first look at it. What does the graph, the chart, and the statistics, what does it say? So what's the main point or main message behind it? And a second point I've come up with, that you describe, in this case, the graph or a bar chart. So what can you see? So there is, of course, vertical and horizontal axis, and what's written on there, or what does it depict? And of course, what does the line depict? But that's, I think, not that difficult. And then you start to describe, but remember, don't describe a graph like in August there was a fall of 9%. In September, prices slowly increased by 2%. Don't go step by step. I think it's too boring. It's simply too boring to listen to. So I've actually provided this line graph, pie chart. And of course, if we start here, when the first thing we're going to do is, what does it say? And what is it about? In this case, it's the situation in Austria of electricity consumption. And it's the electricity consumption, it's actually a breakdown of electricity consumption in 2008 by categories of consumption. Okay, so having covered this, first step done. Second step is quite easy here. So you have several slices in this pie chart, and those several slices are different categories, of course. Simply, but you should know the categories, of course. If you don't know, it's quite difficult to describe them. So, and if you, for example, if you start describing. So, how do we approach this? So, you could start off. Well, you see here, the biggest one here is the heating. So the heating consumes a lot of electricity. So you could, of course, say that the heating is one of the highest consuming devices, or one of the categories that has the highest percentage of all the categories that are mentioned here. Or you could simply describe, compare them to the small ones here. For example, other kitchen and domestic appliances. So you could say, compared to other kitchen and domestic appliances which are make up only 3.5%. The heating consumes 20.5%. And what I forgot, always be careful with the tense here. So I caught myself right now using the present tense, but you always have to be sure when this statistics or chart was released. So, or not was released, but which year it's talking about. So in this case, 2008. So I could also say, according to this pie chart, the heating took up more than 20% of our electricity consumption in 2008. And then it's always, or you could also, I think, because it's quite interesting here, that those three here, so the large domestic appliance, the water heating, and the fridges and freezers, take up almost half of all the electricity consumption in our household. So, in all households actually. So you could start with, it's quite surprising to me that the categories large domestic appliances, water heating, and fridges and freezers take up almost half of all households. Electricity took off all almost the half of all households electricity consumption. So always be creative with it. If you see something like a really big slice or something, work with it and work with the smaller ones and compare them. It's actually not that difficult. You just have to, as I said, if you practice the phrases, it will all go down quite well. So And so I have provided another interesting graph here. Yeah, so that's better. So that's a graph that I quickly made. It should depict the units sold worldwide, so the worldwide sales of product Y by company X. So could any company imagine, be creative, just do a line graph as I did and start describing. In this example, we have on the horizontal axis we have the months, and on the vertical axis we have the units sold. And here we can start off, for example, with sales rose in the first 2 months from, in this case, from 10,000 to 76,000 sold units. Then, what do we see here? In March until April, there is a straight line. So, what vocabulary do we use for a straight line? Exactly. Remain stable or steady. So we could describe it. It's just as I would do it. From the beginning of March, so we're here, beginning of March until the beginning of April, actually, or just April, sales remained stable, steady, and then not only mention it in speaking in short sentence, but also try to combine the sentence. So from the beginning of March until April, sales remained stable, but at the beginning of April, sales decreased dramatically, or sales collapsed, or sales plummeted, or sales reached a low. All the phrases we at first heard, we can now integrate perfectly in this description of the line graph. And then we could go on in May, or however, in May sales rose up again, or had a tremendous increase. And what happened in June? Exactly, in the beginning of June, sales had risen up to 90,000 units. So, repeat it again. If we start with May, however, in May, sales soared again, strong word, or sales had a tremendous increase. And at the beginning of June, sales had risen up to 90,000, which we can see here. 90,000. Or sales peaked. All the strong vocabulary, use it. And then, sadly, the sales decreased or collapsed, or decreased rapidly. Then you can always start, maybe use at the beginning of the summer season. Sales collapsed, decreased rapidly by, and always be careful, if something decreases by, it's actually, in this case, sales decreased at the beginning of summer season, sales decreased by 50,000, which is 9,000 to 4,000. What's in between 50,000? So sales decreased by, not to or something. If you have this example, like I did. And what is in the next month? So we're now in July, August, September is really decreasing, gradual decline until December. So we could finish off with a closing sentence. In the next 5 months, or the next 5 months saw a gradual decline in sales. So you can finish off with this. Is a brilliant sentence, I think, to end a line graph or description. So it's a really sophisticated phrase, actually. So if you use that, it's like top notch. It's really great. So I repeat it again. The next 5 months saw a gradual decrease in sales, and I think that's also a good sentence to end this and my first Matura Express stream. As I've said at the beginning, we're gonna post a link of the PU research website down below of the statistics that you can look them up. And yeah, I'm gonna look forward. I think we're gonna see each other on Monday, on Wednesday. Stay tuned and enjoy. Have a nice evening and drink some beer, of course.